Legal disclaimer. Bespoke Group investment advisory services are offered only through Bespoke Advisory, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Everything we share here is just for information and education. It's not investment, legal, or tax advice. Bespoke does not offer or solicit investment services to the general public. And as always, investing comes with risk, including the possible loss of principal. I want to start today's conversation by allowing you both to introduce yourselves, actually. So,
how about we introduce each other?
Oh, well, you got to start now. He came up with this devilish decision, so.
Yeah, well, why don't you introduce each other and we can fill in the blanks. Sune Sorensen has been, he's become a great friend, really through the business context. I met Sune when we were really starting Bespoke in earnest. We had a vexing problem. We had to figure out how we're going to establish qualified custody for a significant amount of Bitcoin on behalf of a client. And along the way, Sune became the guy who could solve this for us. He was, Sune has a long career in asset management, macroeconomics research, and he was working at a Swiss asset management firm that I was familiar with. And he became the guy who could solve that problem. Little did I know that he was the kind of guy who can solve many problems. And along the way, it just became inevitable that we would join forces and build the company that the Bespoke has become and is becoming.
Oh, well, that's tough to beat, so I'll have to try and reciprocate. Yeah, I was at a stage where I'd come to realize that my area of helping support generationally wealthy families was only a part of the journey, and that really it had to be built together with someone who understood the other side of it. And in my work, I'd come across many different estate planning and all kinds of lawyers, private wealth lawyers. And while what they spoke about is relatively complex and complicated, initially I started to get a grasp of it, and I started realizing who knew what they were talking about, and also who knew how to talk about it. Because when you introduce complex concepts to families who often have a lot on their plate, then that can sometimes be a real problem in terms of making sure that we get what we call the how to own correct. And so I was kind of looking for this unicorn type person who actually understood estate planning across all the areas that affects a wealthy family, but also had the ability to communicate it in an effective way, with empathy. And some of these conversations can be quite personal, and often you're helping people find answers to things they might have been thinking about but never really spent significant time on dealing with. And so we overlapped on a couple of client cases, and I started to feel like this might be an interesting combination. And then I started figuring out that they also were starting to build something that seems to be stretching beyond a law practice, and that maybe we should do something together on that front. And really the journey started there. So Matt McClintock has become my ex-man on the how to own and many other things as we've taken this journey together.
For those who are interested to hear more about the genesis of Bespoke and all of the areas of Bespoke, you can head to our first audio collection, which is on our website, to dive into that. I want to set up today's conversation with two areas that I'd like to cover. And I will follow both of your lead on which path we take. So number one, this is what I'll say is that this conversation is building on an episode that we recorded, and it's the episode right before this one if you're on our website, and it's called Bitcoin Custody and Wealth Planning Explained. It's with Didier from Tetra. And so that was a conversation really about Bitcoin and custody, and we're building from there. And today is really more about the needs and wants of modern wealth holders, and also about stewardship. So we're moving beyond custody and into the other areas of our wealth operating system, if you will.
I listened to the first one, which is excellent conversation, and really it's a deep dive both into Bitcoin and I think into custody and the combination of custody plus structures. And I think in the context of that conversation, primarily the use of offshore structures. And so that's pretty granular, and I think anyone who is interested, not just for Bitcoin, I mean, all the lessons in that really translate pretty much to any asset. Worth really diving into, but I think it might be interesting to broaden out the conversation and speak a little bit just about I think we are a really unique moment in time, somewhat of an inflection point in many different areas. That is both true for generationally wealthy families, but it's also true for the practitioners who serve them. I think there's been a paradigm that lasted for a couple of decades where private wealth asset management was done in a certain way with a certain type of audience in mind. And I think we're at a time where we've already begun the change. If, some people are still talking that this wealth transition is on the horizon, I think people need to probably wake up and realize that has actually been underway for probably a couple of years.
It's happening now.
It's very real. I think anyone who might be listening to this who might be an estate planning lawyer, who might work in the field in some way, is probably already starting to see the signs. They're starting to see a very different type of client come in. If they've worked with the primary wealth builder historically, they're starting to see that wealth transition that they were trying to plan for is actually on the way. That estate plan that they implemented a decade ago, well, now is actually, does it hold up? And specifically in a fast changing environment. So there's an inflection point in change in terms of just who is the wealth holder. A lot of new wealth has been created. Some of that, the Bitcoin community, a lot of that tech. So these are very different people perhaps than someone who built in more traditional industries and how they think about the world. You use the word modern wealth and stewardship. I think is something that we run into in terms of how to think about how to communicate effectively. And I think it's something that every service provider, every advisor out there have to really reset and think through. How do I not focus so much on the solutions of yesteryear, but how do I help deliver the outcomes that people want today? And maybe that's the jumping off point in terms of how we broaden out the conversation, because I think that that's really the nexus of something that will be hopefully adding some value both to an end client who might listen to this, but also to the intermediary who might be listening to this.
Yeah, Sune used a couple of terms there that I want to really zero in on here. There's no question we're at a historic inflection point in the history of humanity. Wealth is already changing hands at a level unprecedented in human history. As the baby boom generation dies, the great wealth transfer, as it's been called, is already underway. And wealth is changing hands at a rate and at a volume that we've never seen before. Our industry has never seen this. And that means that wealth is changing into the hands of new decision makers. Those decision makers are just statistically, they're women. Wealth is passing into the hands of women because they're usually the first ones in line to inherit, because men usually die first. And most marriages that are ending in death now are a marriage between one man and one woman, and the man is dying. And so the woman is becoming the primary financial decision maker. For many women, that's the first time that they've had that level of autonomy and that level of power over significant amounts of wealth. We're also now in a maturation of a generation in which women have been extremely successful investors in their own right and entrepreneurs in their own right. And that, along with new forms of wealth in the form of Bitcoin, the broader world of digital assets, that is part of this inflection point. And I would say that probably over the course of the last, 5 years at least, maybe longer, we're in an era of increasingly globalized wealth. The rest of the world has known this for a long, long time, because the United States was a destination market for a lot of global money. Now a lot of U.S. ultra affluent people are looking to globalize their wealth. They perceive that they've missed some opportunities in other jurisdictions, and they've also seen the devaluation of the dollar increase at an accelerate, I suppose, at a increasing rate. And so, we now see a lot of change already underway in the financial services industry. And so much of what we have sought to build here is the answer at this inflection point. Bespoke is the right answer at the right time to address the convergence of these issues at this inflection point.
I want to ask you both about. I want to come back to something, a couple words that both of you said. Communication, new decision makers, women, Bitcoiner. Modern wealth, right, is requiring a new way of communicating, is what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to me about that? And let's start there.
Yeah, I'll take a first cut at this, and then Sune will add a lot to it, I'm sure. But what that means to me is that increasingly, a lot of people that we get to serve are measuring their returns more comprehensively than just a number on a balance sheet getting larger over time. This rising generation of decision makers, whether it's women who are coming into wealth or a new generation that is rising, they have a broader view of their wealth than at least a lot of historical US-based investors have had. It's not just about a large balance sheet getting bigger, and it's not just measuring success in economic terms. It's measuring it in terms of impact and in terms of meaning. And as a result, this is why the lenses through which, Sune really has been the one who's architected the framing of this, but these are the lenses through which we view a family's wealth and around which we build a wealth operating system. And that is, we think about how you own your assets. We think about where your assets are owned and where they're custodied, the quality of custody to secure the assets from loss. We think about what to own. This is, of course, the investments themselves that are designed to achieve the outcomes that a family is specifically looking for, and then the why, or the overall sense of meaning behind the wealth. And this, in our experience, the rising generation of wealth builders, these are women, these are the rising generation, these are Bitcoiners, they have a much more comprehensive view of wealth and an expression of meaning through that wealth. And before I turn it over to Sune on this is one of the things that I've learned very clearly through the Bitcoiners that we get to work with and through our work in the Bitcoin space. And this is part of the conversation that I had with DDA. Bitcoin is fundamentally different in our experience than crypto because of the nature of Bitcoin, because of the problems that Bitcoin was established to solve for. Bitcoiners have a much more, at least in my experience, Bitcoiners have a much more philosophical view of wealth than just people who are just looking to, get it, make it rich off of a crypto token or a venture opportunity. It's like they're more patient. They have a sense of meaning behind the wealth, and that's what drew them to Bitcoin in the first place. They saw Bitcoin as an expression of responsibility, and as an expression of patience, and as an expression of stewardship. And for a lot of people who don't know Bitcoin or haven't been in it for a long time, that's probably surprising to them to hear that. But that's certainly been my experience. And I think that's been Bespoke's experience, because the clients that we get to serve are not the types of people that are just looking to take a huge balance sheet and make it bigger. They're people who have an expression of responsibility that comes along with the wealth.
It's interesting how there's been a really successful smear campaign on this. So
Yeah, if you refer to to crypto and Bitcoin, maybe just a few perspectives on that, and then I want to get back to your initial question, which I think is probably more broadly interesting. Let's first of all say crypto community means many things to many different people, and certainly what the community has not always served itself well in terms of how it's projected itself into the world. Specifically, sometimes when you feel really, really good about yourself, you can maybe be quite noisy, and that's not unique to that community. It's been generally the way of wealth if you go back to the 80s, and greed is good and forward. So there's certainly some things out there that I think people would probably regret in hindsight. But um, for us, we're in the business of kind of understanding what things are, and at least having an informed opinion on it. And Bitcoin is a different type of asset. It fills a different role within our strategic asset allocation, within our investment side of the house. It is a real asset like digital gold, with some extra attributes to it that makes it interesting. But it is a real asset. It's a unique asset. There's very few real assets in the world that have true price discovery and deep liquidity. And Bitcoin happens to have that 365 days a year, 24 hours a day if you really want to stay up for it. And so that's pretty unique. Physical gold sits alongside it in our portfolios, and they're obviously at different stages of their evolution. And kind of the investor group that sets price is different in those two assets. But fundamentally, that's what Bitcoin is. Now, it has been associated with a broader movement, which has been this kind of crypto evolution, which again has housed anything from the worst scams to just a lot of noise and excitement about things at various stages, and a lot of innovation, and some of it not really realized beyond kind of number go up activities. And that's again pretty normal with technology. So I think within the space, what I think is interesting as a sort of bridge to a larger conversation is that much of what we are talking about here is kind of a reaction to what was. So Bitcoin was a reaction to the monetary system as it was. It came out of the 2008 sort of financial crises. Was many of the trends we are starting about, if you trace them back, the inflection point was around that period of time where a lot of people lost faith in the old paradigm. People started asking questions about what is monetary policy and why are we doing it this way. And I think that that's kind of an interesting follow through, whether it's the Bitcoin or whether it's the woman who has built wealth or whether it's the young inheritor who is looking back at what was done before. What I've found, and this is what I think a lot of intermediaries who will be listening to this will be faced with, is questions. And there's a lot of, when we talk about smear campaigns, again, I'm somewhat biased because I have children of sort of 50 or 12 upwards to 21, but like there's a lot of like, oh, these kids are always on their phones and they're not like we used to be, etc. And there's all of this, and which I think is just inherent with any generation. But I think it's expressed more loudly. And sometimes even with parents, who are worried about next generation. And I actually think in most cases, the people we interact with often are very thoughtful. They have a lot of questions, and they don't just accept because the expert says, this is monetary policy, this is estate planning, this is private banking, this is asset management. It must be this way because I have gray hair and I've done it like this for a long time. We will get pushback for that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with the pushback. I think the interesting space that we inhabit is that we are kind of mid-journey in between the two. And often it's kind of accepting that nothing is perfect. Most of these systems should evolve, and some of them have stood still for too long, whether it's the banking rails that takes forever to get anything done and very costly, whether it's how we communicate around estate planning and financial services. We should rightfully be challenged in some of it, but we should also make sure that there are some good elements. There are some things that are just as old as time that has worked very well for a very long period of time. Some of that is within Matt's domain in planning and structures. Some of it is within private banking and custody. Some of it is within the tenets of investment. And some of it is just within how to communicate around family. Many of these problems are not new. They're just the same problems happening to new people. And so often we are sitting in a place where, yes, we are definitely very open-minded to the idea of change and want to encourage that and learn from it. And sometimes it's helpful to have someone come outside with fresh eyes and push back. And we've been through that journey for a couple of years, and that I think has made us better. But then we're also in the position where we're going to have to explain to people who might be living somewhat in the future in terms of how they want the world to be, that the world we're in today is the world we're in today. And you're going to need to navigate the rules of the road as it is today, else you're going to have to face consequences. And that's a lot of the educational conversations that we end up having, which is a two-way conversation of learning and giving and taking and having to walk away and rethink some of the things that I might have perceived to be true, but I'm starting to question as I have more of these conversations.
For intermediaries and practitioners who are in a place where they're ready to accept, right, and embrace this the change, like there's radical change happening around us, and I'm curious for someone who's interested in finding their way into these types of conversations about meaning and more bigger, more expansive view. How where did that's a big thing. That's big. That's a big change.
Well, I would
Where
start
does
with a
one
really.
start?
I would start at a very simple level, and I'm known for giving very long answers, so I'll keep this one pretty short. I think if you are sitting and you're a legacy service provider in the private wealth space right now, you got 3 decisions. 1, you adapt. 1, you retire. 3, you die. And it's one of those 3, and there's not much in between. And
2 and
if
3
you
are
want to
are
retire,
the least attractive, seems like.
Can we make the title of this adapt, change, or what was it? Adapt,
Retire,
or die.
well, for me, retirement and dying is somewhat similar, as I would miss the puzzle of the work I do. So those are probably 1 for me. But for some people, it's fair enough. Like sometimes you probably had a good run. The last 2 decades have been great for anyone who had a successful practice. And there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I've done a lot of learning, I've done a lot of work, and I feel like this is not for me, this next phase. And ideally, you've developed young people that are coming behind you within your firm, and it's time to hand off the reins. That's also true for families, where someone has built a successful business. They are facing exactly the same change, the same questions. But I say that, and it's a little bit direct, but I actually think it's very true, because when you commit to one of those, specifically if you're obviously committing to adapting or change or trying to learn new things, then to your question, which I'm sure Matt can speak a little bit more to, but then you have to break that into steps. How do I change a practice that's been successful for a long time? How do I change an approach to thinking about wealth and communication about wealth that has been successful, but will no longer be successful? And I think that that's a journey for everyone, and it's obviously somewhat individual, but I don't think there's any other options.
I think adaptation is the right way to look at this because, as a career estate planning attorney, having worked with a lot of really sophisticated wealth managers, trustees, trust companies, CPAs, insurance professionals, what I think successful adaptation looks like is healthy collaboration and realizing that ultra affluent families have a lot of complexity in their lives, and that complexity is unavoidable. The complexity is just part of having wealth at scale, because when you achieve a level of wealth that you're just not practically going to consume during your lifetime, you've got tax considerations. You certainly have wealth transfer considerations. You probably have asset protection and privacy considerations. You have investment considerations. You have investment opportunities that become available that aren't available to other people. And that creates a lot of confusion. And that just creates that's just a natural level of complexity. And in the wealth, in the ultra affluent advisory space, I think if we were to kind of categorize something like that, you have a lot of very important but historically siloed service providers. The attorneys are doing their thing, the CPAs are doing their thing, the investment people are doing their thing, and so on. And so if you're the family sitting in the middle of this, that starts to feel like chaos. You just have all this noise around you all the time, and you've got 2 or 3 different lawyers they're telling you 4 or 5 different things. You've got CPAs that you've outgrown, but maybe you don't even realize it. You've got a family business, perhaps. You've got sophisticated investments. You've got family dynamics, and for the successful estate planner or CPA or whomever, adaptation means learning to collaborate with other advisors in this space. So you are actually adding real value to the family in the middle of it and not just contributing to the noise. Where I think the conversations, where I think adaptation starts to be really relevant in the space is when we're dealing with mass affluent families. Mass affluent families don't really have a ton of complexity in their lives. And so therefore the CPA or the attorney or whomever can somewhat rightly think, well, I'm the center of the universe in this client's world, because they don't have a whole lot of other advisors. Adaptation for the collaborator, or for a collaborative wealth advisor, attorney, or whatever, has to flip that upside down and say, wait a second, this is truly a client-centric world. This is not a professional-centric world. The client and the client's family is the center of this system, and we have to figure out how we're going to adapt to then add real value in that system rather than just be another piece of noise in their world. And so this is really the mandate that this is the discovery, I think, that has called us on this journey to say, you know, what really needs to happen is a company like ours that is truly interdisciplinary. We've got asset managers from the US, we've got asset managers from Europe, we've got estate planners from the United States, we've got estate planning resources and assets from all over the world, we've got tax advisors from all over the world, we've got family office coordinators from all around the world. And so the answer that Bespoke seeks to provide is the ability to create a system, a wealth operating system of sorts, so that the all of the complexity that is surrounding the family starts to operate in concert as opposed to operating cross purpose. And so that's, you know, to my mind, if I'm just a estate planning attorney sitting somewhere having a really successful practice, if I want to add value to the rising generation of wealth, I have to start learning how to operate inside of a system instead of operating inside of a silo. And Bespoke serves to kind of speak into that.
Maybe just to build it out from that a little bit, because I think, you know, it's easy for us to say, oh, we've kind of figured out some of this stuff, but we created this Venn diagram of the how to own, the where to own, the what to own, and the why, and all the different, at least many of the different things that we have existing clients who's asked us to go out and solve for. But even when we sit down and we look at a new client project, every time we have a family come in with sort of generational level wealth, there's part of that Venn diagram that doesn't cover something unique to that family. And so sometimes that's a geography that is new to us. Sometimes, hey, I want to go buy a home in France or in Singapore, whatever it might be, something that takes us outside of what we have in-house. And then it becomes, to Matt's point, this idea of operating in an ecosystem. One of the big things I think that has changed from a US perspective, particularly in the last decade, has been that it's become much more global. Historically, maybe they had a home or some property overseas, or maybe some business interest that touched other parts of the world, but most of it was back home. The family was back home. That is definitely not the case anymore, and it's been gradual, and then it's really sped up in the last sort of year, I would say. And that just means, like, if you have a great practice that has primarily thought about US estate taxes and tax planning, you are now having to think about multiple jurisdictions. When you're thinking about a family wanting to have optionality where it wants to spend its time, you're needing to think through many different layers of things that are aside, that are sort of second and third order effect of those decisions. It's pretty unreasonable to think you could have a company that could have all of that within and also have it in a way where it's not more chaos or more divisions or silos arguing with each other about where to take the client, which I think is unfortunately a little bit the sort of global supermarket model where you look at it on paper and then you look at what the lived experience of clients is. It is like no one speaks to each other. And so, you know, that doesn't seem to work. And so I think the future is more of an ecosystem. It's about optionality. And then to Matt's point, you're going to have to figure out how to play together when you're trying to build something for a client with other people, even in my space, within the asset management space, which is often a place dominated, let's just say, with strong personalities who don't generally want to make the decisions. Like, I sit and look at a client's portfolio and I have real estate in various parts of the world. I have active business interests. I have private equity through managers. I have venture capital through other managers. I have global equities. I have Bitcoin. I have all of these different things. And while we try and build a pretty broad team in terms of how we think, the actual implementation of this now and again will need someone else who that's all they do. That's what they spend their time on. Even if it's another broad manager sitting in an investment committee around the table with the client and actually have conversations. No one has a crystal ball. It's a pretty changeable world out there right now, both geopolitically and technology-wise. These are two of the mega trends that either create or destroys wealth, you know, at scale for generationally wealthy families. And so to try and navigate all of this and also be responsive to a family who wants certain outcomes, I don't think it's a one person job or one firm job often.
There's something I want to zero in on, because Sune has been talking about this multi-jurisdictional kind of global approach. And I think the thing that I learned fairly early on is that the regulatory bodies that govern practices, like in my background was the practice of law, but the regulatory bodies in my case that govern the practice of law think in silos. It's like I I'm now admitted in 4 different jurisdictions in the United States, and even beyond those jurisdictions, I would pull in other strategies opportunistically because Nevada might have a better solution than Ohio has, or South Dakota may have a better solution than Kentucky has, or a place like Switzerland might have a better solution than anything in the United States has, or the Cook Islands, or something like that. And so I learned early on as an estate planning attorney to then pull in different solutions from different jurisdictions to get a certain outcome for a client. And that was somewhat avant-garde, even in the estate planning space. But ultra affluent families, not only do they think globally in terms of their investment opportunities, they hopefully are thinking globally in terms of the how to own strategies for their wealth vehicles. And even today, a quarter of the way through the 21st century, the estate planning practices, bar associations that govern the practice of law think in jurisdictional silos. And so it's very tempting, I think, for an attorney, just the best law firm in Southern California, for example, to historically think through the lens of California, where they really should be thinking about, I need to see this world through the lens of the ultra affluent family and think about, okay, well, outside of California, what are the planning strategies, what are the planning structures we need to be bringing to bear for these people so we can hopefully give them better outcomes than the very poor asset protection that California provides, or the onerous income tax burden that California imposes. And so I think the best practitioners, the best service providers out there do bring in this global lens for families. But this is part of the adaptation process that Sune is talking about for people who serve clients in this space. We all have to be thinking globally, and that also means that we have to learn how to collaborate, because nobody can be an expert in all things. We have to then be able to collaborate with other experts, pull them in to then share ideas, create the best opportunities so we can then serve these families in a way that's unparalleled.
This makes me think about Matt early when we started this podcast journey, about how you said that you would never refer to yourself as an expert, and anybody who does, you just won't trust.
It's like
Yeah.
big red X across anybody who calls themselves an expert.
Yeah, and I've been really conscious of that, and that's been very intentional, is to not really refer to anybody on our team in that way, because outcomes are really produced from a collaboration. And I can't help but notice what you're describing is really a shift from, when you're in this, the silos, whether it's, whatever area, jurisdictional silo, just the siloed landscape that it has been.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very competitive, like it's led by, it's
often
there's a relationship
dominated by
between,
kind
like,
of a scarcity mindset. I mean, a
and
lot
the
of it's dominated
incentive
by a
is,
scarcity mindset.
yeah, and then when you move to this, what you're speaking to is, and what you've been saying is, like, you're moving from this competitive scarcity mindset to this collaborative, abundant mindset of, like, you eat, we all eat,
Yeah.
we share a table. And
I mean, as Sune would say, it's a 2 + 2 = 8 type of combination,
this is special, and I want to ask you. So can you explain to me how you have this orbit visual that we've worked with, and these pieces of this, like, there's space junk in there, and all of it's especially the higher your wealth builds, the more crap that's, like, flying into your orbit, right? And so now there's this system, this wealth operating system, where you can, like, assess, right, what is happening in the orbit, throw away the crap that isn't serving anybody, and then you have these, like, very intentional pieces. And I am, and now I want to get out of the metaphor. I want to get out of that abstract. And like very practically, are you telling me that tax advisors, estate planning advisors, whatever the heck bespoke is, like that all of these players can collaborate? Is that what you're telling me? And then if that's what you're telling me, how?
Yeah, when they're operating at their best, they can. And I want to go back for a second about experts. I mean, I think it's one thing to have expertise, and it's another thing to be an expert or to call yourself an expert. I mean, I think that Bespoke has some really interesting expertise in-house, but I don't think any of us would call ourselves experts, because to my mind, if you accept the title of expert, to my mind, that then it's at least a temptation to become complacent. It's, if I'm an expert in something, then why do I keep learning? Why do I keep reading? Why do I keep stretching? Why do I keep thinking? And so I have expertise, but I feel like I have more questions every day than answers, than the number of answers I've ever had. And so I think I'm proud of the expertise that I have, and I'm proud of the expertise that we have assembled with the collaborative of ex-men and ex-women that we've brought into this company. But it's that openness and that curiosity and the mindset of abundance, as opposed to a mindset of scarcity, that allows us to collaborate well. It's like we have known early on. I presume this is true for Sune as well. This was certainly true historically throughout my entire career as an estate planning attorney. I knew that there was way more work that could be done than I could ever do. And so if I would approach my collaborative relationships with other attorneys who should have been competitors of mine, but if I approach them as collaborators and as an opportunity for me to add value to them and them to add value to me, and together we both just become better at our craft, that means we're then providing better services to more people collectively. So it's like Bespoke we can't serve everybody who needs the kinds of services that we can provide. However, if we can create a collaborative environment and help, whether it's attorneys, wealth managers, CPAs, fiduciaries, elevate their craft and kind of start to think collaboratively, it's like Bespoke is going to do just fine. And we will never be able to take all of the business that we can do. And so it's like, if we can then help other wealth managers, other estate planners, other tax people to up their games, all that means is that the services get better and better and better for more and more people over time. And I know it sounds kind of lofty and idealistic, but that's just kind of who I am. I mean, that's how Bespoke makes a dent in the universe. That's how Bespoke makes the world a better place, is by doing better work for more people and helping them get better outcomes. And we can do that for our colleagues, just like we can do that for our clients. And we can also do that for our team members who are on this journey with us. That's the mission.
Yeah, I can echo that, but I think there's one thing that is there's something structural about why things should be an ecosystem but shouldn't be the same. So there are certain roles within, like, again, if I'm building from my perspective and I am the generationally wealthy family, I do not want my asset manager to also be my custodian and my accountant and my one source of truth about what assets I have. That is already played out. It's called Bernie Madoff. And there's other aspects, like, again, Matt and Jonathan has been very brave because, in fact, they stepped away from 30 years of experience, and Matt maybe a little bit less, a few years, and essentially decided that it would not be right if Bespoke was also implementing the blueprints that we help families build. And so they shut down a successful estate planning practice and walked into this new kind of thing that we were building. At that stage, it was pretty undefined what exactly that was going to be. Partly because of this principle that it does not seem right if we truly say we sit on the same side of the table at the client as a fiduciary and we are building in their interests a set of solutions that's going to deliver the outcomes they want. If there's one aspect that could be questioned, as in terms, are we making decisions from the client's perspective or from our own financial perspective, then that whole thing starts to break down. And trust is a very fragile thing. At the moment you start cracking one way around the edges, it's very difficult to put it back together. And so, again, this is why the ecosystem is needed and, in fact, should be part of a structural plan, which is checks and balances. It means transparency. It means client is always in control. We build nothing at Bespoke where any other part of this ecosystem cannot be changed, removed besides the client and the client's interest or areas of interest. And so when you peel back everything that is within our blueprint, you can get rid of the trustees, you can get rid of us, you can get rid of the custodians. Everything is interchangeable and everyone has to perform their role for the whole thing to come together. To your analogy about the space junk, like all the noise will still be there. Complexity just never go away. Generationally, wealth and family is complexity times 10 and sometimes times 100, depending on the wealth and depending on the family. But there are ways to have a constellation of solutions in place that insulates you so you can focus and spend your time on the areas that are important to you. But that constellation only really works if everyone is actually aligned and if there is checks and balances. And so it's important to note that while it's not about just it being a beautiful collective of expertise, it's also actually inherent in a good plan that there is checks and balances built into it. I think just if there was a word that would apply to all of these areas, it's just optionality. We're living in a fast-changing world. Life changes fast, specifically when you're younger and you're coming to terms with wealth. That's one of these things I like to highlight, that we get to work with people who have been fortunate enough to create exponential wealth, i.e. wealth that has happened very fast in a very outsized way, extraordinary level of wealth. The reality, though, is that as a human being, we learn linearly and often by 2 steps forward and 1 backwards, and sometimes a big punch in the face and 2 steps backwards. And so sometimes you can find yourself where the measure of success, at least in our society today, has gone up exponentially, but this person is still at a journey where they're a 25-year-old individual who's trying to find out who they are and what their values are and what it's all about for them. And so I think when we think about the system, it must inherently be there must be optionality built into it, because sometimes we have conversations with a client family, even people who are more mature than 25, in their 30s, but they've been super busy building and they've been really narrowly focused and they've never really taken the time to ask themselves, what is this all about besides number go up or besides me solving this problem and building this business? And so, we are very cognizant of the idea that, again, back to my point about optionality, where everything can change besides who the client is. This must be adaptable. And that's just within the client's life. Then we could spend 5 hours talking about the geopolitics, the technology, the tax law, all of these other things which are in constant flux around you. And so if you build too rigid, it's one of these interesting challenges if you have a mind and a mindset for challenges where you need to be both rigid and flexible. There's certain things that has to be super safe and secure, and some of it is the North Star of the values. But also within it has to be the flexibility for someone to grow, learn more about themselves and decide to change direction, and or for the world to go in a completely different direction than it looked like when you started the journey. And so I think the wealth operating system shouldn't be thought of as something stationary that you just do and put some trust documents in a drawer and say, job done. This is truly something that must be an ongoing, constant. It doesn't go away. It's always there. And so you have to build an operating system that can adjust to that.
It has to be dynamic. I mean, it has to be dynamic, and really Bespoke's mandate is to be the systems engineers for those wealth systems, because all these things, legal documents, tax elections, custodial solutions, investment portfolio designs, all of those things are important. And there has to be some level of friction built into those things, so you're not just capriciously being blown around all the time. You have to have in the investment world, for example, we do a lot of discovery around what is it you're really trying to solve for? What are the kinds of things that you want to invest in a way that's aligned with how you see the world? How you see the world doesn't change a whole lot from year to year even, but maybe over the course of a decade, it will evolve and mature a little bit. But the investment decisions that you make aligned with your worldview, those will ebb and flow a little bit. And so it's like there are certain things that are, I wouldn't say rigid, but I would say more enduring. And then there are other things that happen a lot faster, whether it's market turns one way or the other. You have to be adaptable for those things. And in the legal world, where I come from, there are a lot of different types of structures that you have to set into motion that by their nature, they have to have friction built into them. You have to create certain irrevocable trusts and other types of structures that create distance between you and your assets. If you want to get certain asset protection outcomes or tax optimized outcomes, you have to do that. And that can be difficult for some people. But the important thing there is, while they have to be enduring, they can also be flexible so that they can adapt as circumstances require. And so Bespoke, the mission that we're on is to help families design those systems that can adapt as necessary, but are resilient where they need to be, and then continue to manage those systems so that we can be looking at the horizon and saying, okay, here is this change. Your reality has shifted, or some external factor has changed, and as a result, we need to then explore adaptation to your system.
It's quite a vulnerable position actually to be in. When you were talking about, we live in a time where this wealth can be created very quickly. You were talking about the pace, and it moves so fast, right? Like you're in a jet. You're not in like a 2-seater, okay? And it flies, and then you reach kind of a point where you're in a totally new situation, a totally new circumstance, and you become, I'm seeing, quite vulnerable in ways, especially to this wealth landscape that wasn't built for this moment.
Yes, and what if you're not the one who built that wealth in the first place, but you saw somebody else build that wealth? And um, whether you're a spouse or whether you're a child, and you weren't the one directly responsible for building that wealth, there's often that can be intimidating for people who aren't prepared for that. I'm going through an excellent biography right now on John D. Rockefeller. Excellent book that I know Sune has read, Rob has read. It's called Titan, and one of the sadder themes in that book, which is a recurring theme throughout at least United States wealth transfer, and I suspect that this is true in other cultures as well, is how ill prepared a rising generation can be to step into the formidable shoes of a wealth builder like John D. Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller Jr. had a really hard time adapting to what the family's wealth meant. He had a massive inferiority complex, trying to measure up in his own mind to the expectations of his dad. And we see this time and time again with inheritors. And often, honestly, Claire, it's often the spouse who says, I had no idea how much wealth we had, or I had no idea the scope of our investments or how wide ranging this family business was, until all of a sudden it's dropped in the lap. And so this really speaks to the importance of building systems and now facilitating conversations and preparation for the future decision makers, whether those future decision makers are the spouse or children or other beneficiaries. It's like, how, being able to sit in the tension of, the power vacuum that gets created when a wealth builder is now gone, and new people have to be able to make strong decisions, often rapidly, with limited information. And so this is the challenge of the rising generation.
Why have we come from a place where talking about money, or talking with your children, or with your spouse, or just speaking honestly and freely about money and wealth with your people? How have we gotten here? Why is that? Has that not happened?
I would take it a little differently. I actually think, it's one of these things where we are living through different experiences. And I would say that probably the generations today have more knowledge, more information, at least access to it, just because of the internet and how much you can access through it. I also think families have figured out how to have more conversations about stewardship and wealth more broadly. And so I think in the broadest sense, I think we are probably in one of the better places throughout history. I think what has changed broadly is that there used to be a framework where it wasn't something you challenged. And so if you were the son of J.D. Rockefeller, then you knew what you were going to be doing with your life. And there was not really any question whether you should go surfing or go and build your own business or do something else. That's what you did. And so you didn't have the conversation that I think today now you have more complexity because people have realized, like, look, this can be a golden cage. I don't want to see my kids stifled or led into spending what is a finite thing in life, which is time, in a way that they're not enjoying. Everyone who has a child wants to see them happy and see them evolve and see them grow and realize whatever their dreams and ambition might be. And so I'm sure even Rockefeller probably had some soft bone in there somewhere where he probably wished that maybe things would have been a little bit different, but those times they were not. It was very rare that you would have that conversation. Whereas today, or the last 30 years, it's been much more allowed for that people would stray outside, partly because of just some of the really terrible stories of when you try to enforce a very rigid system on the next generation, then you have a reaction, and sometimes that reaction was self-destructive. And so I think we are actually in a somewhat better place, but I do think that there's one of these things where humanity has been very good at transferring knowledge that is scientific or mathematical. So we've been standing on the shoulders of giants in terms of our evolution, where we've been very poor. And I think it's inherent to the human mind is in some of the areas that are more emotional. So every human seems to tend to have to learn about wealth and greed and fear and the matters of relationship with other people. You can hear about it and you can see it, but you kind of have to learn it yourself. And I think what we are finding that keeps repeating in this conversation is that even today, often the transfer of wealth is not a process. It is an event. It is the event when the principal either has a really health scare or actually passes away. And that's the transfer of wealth. But it should really have been a decade or 2-decade long process of educating the children, showing them what this business, or as a couple between you, often couples have different roles within a family setting, but at least that there would have been some kind of communication around what is all of this, what does it mean, what are you going to be faced with. And I think still today, it's pretty rare that we get away from this idea that the wealth transfer becomes something that is either expedited because of a health scare or literally because someone passes. And that's maybe the only time that there's been real conversations about it, besides kind of there's these things like the planning structures, and then there's the spreadsheet with the assets. Most families of significant wealth has probably had some kind of conversation about those, but that it doesn't solve much. It's not just the transfer of the value, it's the transfer of the values that led to the value in the first place. And so if you haven't built a family with resilience and understanding about what this is, then you're going to have this kind of event experience, and then suddenly you have someone sitting, even if they knew we are worth $350 million, isn't that cool? But nothing can really protect you from all the complexity that then comes with it, which is non-obvious often. One of the things in terms of this exponential wealth and linear personal growth is it's quite often that the person who built all the wealth has been laser focused on whatever problem they were solving. If they built a business that they then sold, or if they inherited it even, they might have been focused on that. But I can assure you one thing is the world around them will know that they have $350 million, and a lot of people are going to want a piece of that, whether it is family, friends, people you thought you could trust, and then you can go out, the rings in the water keeps expanding into service providers, into people who want to sell you things. And you may start out with a pure set of intentions, but pretty quickly you probably find that you get taken advantage of by people you thought you could trust somewhere along the first 2 or 3 years of the wealth. And then to your point about being vulnerable, then what vulnerable people do when they get close to the flame is they retract back in and think everything is against me, and the wealth becomes a burden. And a lot of the time when Bespoke gets in front of a client, it is either they've been somewhat down that journey, but they're trying to now figure out that I need a team, I need solutions, I know what outcomes I want, and I definitely know which outcomes I do not want, but I haven't quite managed to find someone who can help me build this ecosystem that's going to make the wealth not a burden, but something that opens up the world for you, allows you to spend your time like you want to spend it.
So this wealth operating system is actually an answer to the problem of there being a single point of, there doesn't have to be a single point of
Right.
trust anymore.
Right, because if you think about the system, to Suna's point earlier, there's one critical point of a system, and that is its core. And the system that we create is around the client at the core. And so everything else on that system is expendable, including us. And so it's like what is enduring, what stays at the core. It's like a heliocentric type of universe like we have, where all the stars and satellites orbit the sun. It's like same thing. It's like everything in this wealth operating system mental model that we're using here. It's like the client has to be at the core, and that's the one unchangeable thing, is the client and the client's mission, the client's sense of meaning, and what their life is all about. And so the service that we're called into is to keep the client at the core of that, and then create the system around which the system that orbits that client.
To my understanding, Bespoke is helping steward or supporting those who are stewarding legacy from one generation to another, right? In a new way, in a way that that doesn't break. And this is happening actively today, and it's been happening. Can you share an anecdote that might illuminate for our listeners a key insight that has been, used as a tool or to create this outcome?
Well, I think if you're going to be the advisor to a steward of tremendous wealth, you have to understand what is stewardship to them, because stewardship is I really love the term stewardship, because if you compare it to ownership, there are two very different ways of thinking about wealth. For example, stewardship is something you're here on this earth on a finite amount of time to maintain, ideally hand off in a better way. And that's not just the dollar amount, it's also the impact that comes with that, and the community that might be built around operating a business, the philanthropy you might do, etc. So I think our journey with any client starts with trying to understand what is stewardship for this family, and it's different for all of them. And I think, an interesting way to give you something tangible that might also reflect something useful for an intermediary in this space. We often have these conversations, and Matt is often a lead in this conversation, which is, if there's generational wealth and Bespoke does what Bespoke's supposed to do, then generational wealth will be handed to the next generation. The question is, how is it split when we have that transfer? So there's really four places that wealth can go. One is they can consume it if they have younger children, them and their younger children. The other bucket is essentially one of what goes to the next generation. What does that look like? How does that get structured? Then you got the third one, which is philanthropy. And then you got the fourth one, which is the tax consequence of transfer of wealth. And for us, if you have $500 million, we generally start a conversation with that simple exercise. If you were to address percentages approximate on this wealth, how much would go into those four buckets? And really, often clients are like, I hadn't really thought about it like this. Let me go away and think about it. Because it's actually, while it seems simple, it's a pretty big question. And it'll be the driver of how we think about lots of the stuff that comes afterwards. Because at the other end of those four things is the structures that Matt designs. How to own are often the key piece for how we get some of these outcomes. And there's a structure involved in most things we do. And then there's the assets that's going to be sitting within those, which ones are the best assets to put in these different buckets. And so the journey kind of starts with that, but the family really has to outline that. So you will have a family where the philanthropy is their largest bucket. They're saying, hey, I want to give in my lifetime and beyond my lifetime. I want this wealth to be spread out into things that I value, that I see as key things I want to try and have an effect on with this thing that I've been given stewardship of. Others, it's really more about, I want to build a legacy of my children becoming builders who build on top of my business and build something better, because I believe in entrepreneurship, I believe in innovation as a force of change, and I believe in the community that can be built within a well-run business. And I want them to be that. And so for them, it's not about taking money out. It's really, we feel we have an impact through continuing the legacy, through setting next generation up in that category. And to be honest, to others, I want to enjoy this. I want to go and build the house I always dreamed to be in. I want to sail the world. I want to do all of these things. And that's also fine. Very rarely is there anyone who's like, I want to write a really big check to the tax man. But like, there are maybe some people out there where that's a priority. But mostly it's within those three buckets that the real journey of discovery then continues. And I would say, in a practical sense, if you think about those three buckets, that's often how we end up spending our time with clients, which is help me consume and enjoy, help me prepare my next generation and let them build on top of what was already here, or I want to be incredibly philanthropic. And the other thing to just leave it on is like, once people start doing the math on this, and specifically if you project that wealth compounds pretty well over time, even if you run very conservative strategies, the number is sometimes shocking to people. Someone says, I want to be philanthropic with 60% of my wealth and 500 million. Well, you can project that out over 3 decades in a compounding, even conservative, and you're not giving away, you're giving away significant wealth. And then the question becomes, how do I do that effectively in a way that aligns with my values? And then that's the challenge we get to go and play with. Other times it's, how do I get to continue building with my family this business empire that I think is a way to affect the world? And other times it's really more about structure and consumption. And for most families, it's a mix of all of those three things, but it just depends on the size of percentage that ends up getting allocated to the different buckets.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that that's a really good summation of it. I think at a more meta level, what we do is we call people into a sense of discovery about what's it all about. It's like people people have a tremendous amount of depth to them. I think that's just universally true. And too often, again, I think I can speak with some authority because I've been in this space for a long time. Too often, conversations become very tactical very quickly with families. It's like, whether it's an investment decision or a portfolio allocation or an estate planning strategy or a tax decision, it gets tactical really quickly. And what we try to do is help people zoom out and say, what problems are we really solving here for you? What does it really mean to you? What do your wealth is going to be an expression of who you are, and your investments should be aligned with how you view the world. And so we slow down the conversation with people. We don't just rush to an answer. We don't rush to a solution. We don't rush to investment allocation. We don't have a product you can buy. You can't pay us to do your estate plan. So it's like, we don't have a product that we're just going to foist on somebody coming in. It's like, we can take the time to do the discovery and say, okay, because I don't want somebody who's going to be my client for a year or two. I want a family who's going to be clients of Bespokes for 50 years. And that's just a very different way of viewing the conversation and saying, you're on a mission here. What is it? And how can we help advance that for you? It's not our mission. Our mission is to empower yours. But it's like, what mission are you on? If you don't realize you're on a mission, then we can help you figure that part out. But whatever the mission is that you're on, we're going to create the system that gets you there.
There's this interesting paradox that I just realized, which is like, you're speaking to a lot, when you get to a place where you can have a long-term horizon, like a long view, you actually buy yourself presence and time, which is quite,
it's so different, and it's so different, Claire, in our industry, because, our industry is full of companies that are getting rolled up by private equity or that are trying to go public or whatever. That's not our journey. And so it's like, we can slow down and we can build this. We from day one, we have built organically around our clients. They need something, we figure out how to make it so.
Wow.
They need something else, we figure out how to make that so. And that has been the story of how Bespoke went from 0 to 1. And that will be a continuation now as we go into our own future. One of the things that I'm proudest of is that we have no outside investors. Nobody owns anything in this company if they're not working full time in the company. We have zero debt. We just, we're modest in how we spend money, and that means we're not in a hurry. It allows us to buy time and build what needs to be built, because we are doing something that ultra affluent families need, that they want, that they crave, that the industry should be giving them, and it wasn't. And so that's what we do. And so that's the category that we define.
I'm kind of blown away by Sune. I think we said this on an internal call once when I was hearing you talk about time and, investing horizons and our pace, and how time is an asset.
I mean, that is when we talk about finite resources. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is the thing is, we cannot make any more. I mean, I think we can do a lot of things at Bespoke, but if someone comes and says, extend me in time, what I can help you do is free up time from things that you may not need to spend your time on. And that I actually think is very powerful. Sometimes when I think through how do we have an effect on families, we can do some spreadsheet analysis of what has been saved on tax and what have we created in compounding and on the investment side, etc. But one of the things I don't really know how you value or how we even think about it sometimes, which is to unleash stewardship and purpose for a family, to help them realize that. Because again, I want to be frank, we have amazing families who are the voice and drivers of a lot of this. I think we have a role around it sometimes as the lubricant or the driver of, or making realization that what is possible and then helping them construct the solutions to get there. But I think to give a human being the time to spend it on the things that are truly important to them, be it family, philanthropy, community, business building, whatever it might be. That's kind of pretty special. That's part of why I enjoy my job a lot, to be honest. It is the fact that we built this thing deciding that we were not going to participate in the old model, which is product sales. We were going to take this journey with these families. And it also meant, I think this is an important thing to Matt's point, which is I cannot sit across from a family initially and then get to sit next to them after they decide to work with us and say, I'm going to help you build a generationally wealth operating system that's going to help you do all these big things you want to do. I'm going to help you be a steward. If I haven't got my own house in order, if I'm not going to be around, which I'm not, Father Time is undefeated. Again, my time is not infinite. So I have to build a practice, a business, an organization, a community that will last beyond me so they can continue to support. And so again, back to Matt's point, there are different business models. Some business models is to build for exit. It's worked for a lot of people out in California, and that's nothing wrong with that model, but it's very important you know which model you're building. And when we started building Bespoke, we built a model never to sell it. And when you build a model never to sell it, then you start thinking longer term inherently, because then I'm like, hey, I'm going to be around this thing for a very long time. Hopefully my family will have some interest in this for a very long time. And so I'm hiring people who I need to maybe see grow, because then I know I'm building real people who knows the mission, who can take on after me. But if I was building this to sell it, I would be recruiting very high CV, high experienced people who would come in and immediately have an impact in the traditional way. And so I could hit some metrics and then exit to private equity in a couple of years. I would have created a very different business that might be financially rewarding for me and my family. But I can assure you it wouldn't have delivered the value for my client families, because suddenly they would be left in chaos with this other group of people who are not the people they started the journey with. And that, for me, is, if there's one good question, if you ask me, a family should be asking if they're out there seeking a wealth operating system, is look at who sits in front of you and understand what is their business and are they really going to be there? Because there's many people with beautiful websites and brochures and really smart people who will sit you down in a fancy office somewhere. But is that business built to serve you long term, or is it built to serve them short term and maybe long term? And I think if I had the privilege of sitting in that room, that would be one of my questions. Who am I working with here? Who am I taking with me on this journey? Because if you're going to go on a long journey, you want to make sure you got the right people around you.
You intentionally, repeatedly, and I don't mean in this conversation, I mean in my experience here, use the word mission. I'm watching all the time that you both are pouring into this thing that you're building, we're building. I want to hear about that.
One of the things I'm really proud of this company, frankly, is, we're not a bunch of really high pedigreed folks. It's like nobody went to Harvard. Nobody grew up with a silver spoon in their mouth or elsewhere. Nobody, we're just a bunch of really scrappy, tenacious doers. We don't. I mean, I don't know enough about the backgrounds of a lot of the members of our team, but those that I know of, nobody comes from a area of tremendous privilege. We're kind of called to do this, and we found ourselves kind of along the way. On my personal story, I'm the first man on my dad's side of the family to have gone to college, let alone get an advanced degree and be a successful entrepreneur. I come from a blue collar background. My mom was a public school teacher. My grandfather on my mom's side was the first guy on that family to put himself through college, and he hitchhiked his way from Arkansas, where he grew up. I mean, the term dirt poor, the reason it's called dirt poor is because the floor of your house is dirt. That's how he grew up in Arkansas. Hitchhiked his way to Oklahoma, of all places, and put himself through college right before he joined the Navy during World War II. That was my grandfather. He never became ultra affluent, but he was a really hard worker, and did a career in banking, and that's what he had retired from shortly before he died. So tenacity, scrappiness, drive was modeled to me early on by my grandfather. And along the way, I discovered this sense of curiosity. I've always been a curious guy, wanting to understand why things work the way they work and why people believe the way they believe. And because I didn't come from a traditional law firm family background, I found myself in law school, and along the way, it's like I didn't have to follow in anybody else's footsteps. I could be drawn to the things I was drawn to, and it just so happened that I was drawn to tax and wealth structuring. And so, but I think because I didn't grow up with a conventional law mindset and a background, I didn't have a family practice to go into. I was able to experiment and explore, and just the way I think just kind of asymmetrically. And one of my skills is the ability to find things that don't seem to go together and find ways to make them go together in elegant ways. And so along the way, that's what led to the type of law practice that I had and the types of solutions that I would come up with for people, finding things that people who had a more constrained worldview and always did their practice because that's the way mom did her practice or dad did his practice, and following in some other person's footsteps is like, I didn't have those constraints. And so along the way, I found unconstrained thinkers like Sune, and unconstrained thinkers like you, and unconstrained thinkers like Rob, and other people like that inside the company. It's like we see the world differently. And so because we have an unconstrained worldview, it allows us to build something different. And you've heard me say this before, I'll say it again. Another thing I'm super proud of is the diversity within our company. We're a team that's now pushing 30 full-time employees, but we cover 3 continents and 18 time zones. We have almost as many women in this company as men, and maybe 50-50. It's pretty darn close. We have a lot of people, probably a majority of people who are not U.S. born, not U.S. citizens, working for our company. We have business partners in Europe and in the United States. We've got staff in China and India, Europe, and all over North America, including in Mexico. I think we probably have 8 or 10 different native tongues inside Bespoke. I am convinced there is not another company remotely like ours that has the diversity that Bespoke has, and that becomes a superpower for us. We already reflect where wealth is, and the global nature of that wealth, and the rising generation of that wealth, and the women that are coming into this wealth. We're already there. We natively reflect all of that. And that's just because we have been lucky enough to build this team of scrappy, creative, unconventional, unconstrained thinkers into this company. So we can't help but be who we are because of the blend that we've found.
Yeah, it's interesting since I got to know Matt, his background story in terms of family, like 2 or 3 generations back. I think we'd known each other for a while, and obviously we get on. But I remember sitting and we were talking about family at his wonderful book nook in his house at Colorado. Maybe that might have been a glass of some alcoholic beverage involved, but we were kind of diving into these background stories, and I'm not going to bore everyone with mine, but it's incredibly similar in terms of the grandparents through to the parents and kind of this journey just in Northern Europe as opposed to in the US. And so I'm not sure what to make of that, but it's an interesting data point to me. But I like the thing with the mission. And for me, mission is stated intent combined with relentless effort day after day. And so one of these things we have within the company is this thing step by step, but always upwards. And so for me, mission is that it's, there's many people with ideas and intent, and certainly many people who are loud about it. There's less people on this planet who also have the commitment, discipline, drive that it takes to then go and execute against it every day. Good days, bad days, in between days. And I think, again, a lot of our clients are those people who are taking that extraordinary journey to get to extraordinary outcomes. And it does take those 2 things, obviously a great idea, a great vision, some kind of mission, and then the commitment to actually doing it, not just for 6 months, but sometimes for 10, 20, 30 years, day after day. And when I think about us and how we're gonna serve families, it's really about having a team who buys into the mission. And then I see every day through the various means that is increasingly digital, because as Matt outlined, we're a distributed team, but I just see people plugging in their time zones, sometimes outside of their time zones, and putting in the hours and the effort. And that gives me confidence back to the thing when I have to sit down with a family and say, I can help you. It's not me, the person, it's us. And it's the idea that I know behind me are a lot of people who are on this mission in terms of developing and implementing and managing these operating systems. And so, it may seem like a small thing, but big things are often a lot of small things done together relentlessly. And that's kind of what that mission piece means to me.
How can an estate planner or a tax advisor or some intermediary who's listening to this conversation, who's interested to explore more of what a potential collaboration with Bespoke could look like, what is the best way to engage either of you or our company?
Well, I think there are probably 2 things I want to say. One, I'll first answer your question really directly, and that is, follow along. We do a lot of outreach. We do a lot of thought leadership. Sune and I are both doing quite a few presentations throughout this year, just as every other year. And that happens globally. So follow along, follow the calendar. Sune and I are both on LinkedIn. We have a presence as well on Twitter, or X, I guess. Sune has an excellent Substack that is absolutely worth the read. So all of that stuff can be indexed if you just go to bespokegroup.io. That's our website, and you can, kind of choose your own adventure from there. I think that a lot of what we've said today isn't super surprising or revolutionary for a lot of wealth advisors, frankly, and for the traditional estate planning attorney. I think one thing that probably does challenge their thinking a bit is I guess maybe two things. Probably the one that will challenge them the most is this idea that Bitcoin is actually a thing and that it's something that should be taken seriously. We think it's here to stay. I mean, there's a level of gravitational force that it seems to have now, and so this is not something that can be ignored. There are affluent people all around the world who have significant interest in Bitcoin and the broader ecosystem of digital assets. And so just understanding that these people aren't criminals, these people aren't lunatics, they're early adopters. These are the people who were the first ones to get electricity in their house. These are the people who were the first ones to get a telephone line. These are the first people to have bought a car. And so, this is it's a new monetary technology that people have adopted, and some of them have adopted that at scale, and it's complicated, but it's really, I mean, if I can figure out how to plan for it, I mean, come on, it's not that hard. So there's that. I think the other thing is, which is maybe a little bit more nuanced, is just this recognition that modern wealth is the fact that modern wealth is global, the fact that tremendous amounts of wealth are changing hands at a pace unprecedented, as we talked about. One thing we didn't really talk about is that like a huge percentage of that wealth is not liquid. It's in the form of operating businesses. And in order to serve clients like this, no single practitioner can do it all. It's literally impossible. And so being called into open collaboration with like-minded professionals, that will be the key to success and the key to relevance in an increasingly global economic reality.
Yeah, I'll just build out on that so you know where to find us, obviously, with the website. There's the saying from Frida Kahlo, which I love, which is there's no borders, only horizons. And we build with that in mind across skill sets. But I think it's really important because I think a lot of the clients you're going to be serving, if you're an intermediary out there today, have that mentality into everything with life, where they spend their time, how they invest, how they want to see things happen. But we also, when we talked about inflection points, I think we are sort of at the end of an old order, and we have multipolarity already here. And so the old rarely just lets go without a fight. And so we're having increasingly wealth holders with no borders, only horizon mentalities. And then we have a world that is trying desperately to hold on to borders and limited horizons. Actually, practically, I mean, Matt spoke about regulators and tax authorities and all of these things. All of this is built for a very different world to the new wealth holders. And I think if you're an intermediary trying to help families navigate those conflicting directions of travel, you're going to need an ecosystem to plug into, because you're going to be asked to do things that you never heard of in a world that is constantly changing in front of you. And so one of the things I enjoy, I get to travel quite a bit and meet with intermediaries, often the four clients or people that we collaborate with. And I always come away from that, invigorated, whether they're focused on philanthropy solutions or whether they're working, in estate planning or whether they're a trust company somewhere. I find smart, dedicated people more times than I find the opposite. And I think people do understand this. And I think there's tremendous power in leaning in and creating a bit of a community. And I think at Bespoke, we've kind of realized that our firm is kind of a community of people that integrated and built together. I think there can be rings in the water. Back to my point about structurally, we cannot also have an estate planner firm within our company, but we can certainly have good friends in different places. And the same goes for all these other services. And so I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people out there wrestling with the same questions that we have. And I think maybe this can be a bit of a call to arms in the context of those who doesn't want to retire or die. Come and adapt, work with us, be curious, take this journey, and let's go out in the world. There's like $100 trillion of wealth in North America and private wealth that is changing hands. And to be honest, I don't want to be greedy and take it all. So why don't we all just kind of figure out how to help these people and create some interesting business along the way?
I was going to actually speak to the listener and just say welcome and come along for the ride. If there are topics that you've heard or a thread you want to pull or something else that you're curious about, there is a submission box on our website under this episode where you can write to us and we read them all. So please take advantage of that. If you are listening on Apple or Spotify, that is also fabulous. But I would encourage you to go to our website, bespokegroup.io. There is a button on the navigation bar, which is called Audio Collection. Click that. There's going to be a series that is Audio Collection 2, where this is living. And there you will find the episodes. There. So that's all I have to say. Sune, Matt, thank you for this conversation. And there's going to be more, and I can't wait.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.